The gentle, steady rhythm of rain against a window pane begins, soft and constant, creating an immediate sense of calm and introspection. Imagine its soothing patter as the backdrop to every word. The dust in the attic tasted like forgotten years. Maya coughed, waving a hand in front of her face as the beam of her flashlight cut through the gloom, illuminating swirling motes dancing in the stale air. Boxes draped in ghostly white sheets loomed like silent monuments to a life she and Benjamin had packed away. Graduate degrees, early career moves, the optimistic clutter of their first apartment, the hopeful, untouched remnants of a nursery, planned for a child who never came. 15 years. Half their lives together felt entombed up here, beneath the eaves of the large, quiet house that now echoed with their polite distance. The decision to finally tackle the attic had been born of a different kind of desperation. Not the sharp, urgent kind of their early struggles, but a slow, grinding weight that had settled over their marriage like the dust she was now disturbing. It was a mutual, unspoken acknowledgement that something had to shift. The silences between them had grown longer, deeper, filled not with comfortable companionship, but with the unsaid grievances, the weary resignation of two people navigating parallel lives under the same roof. Date nights felt like obligations. Conversations skimmed the surface of bills and chores, and the warmth that once flowed so easily between them had cooled to a functional civility. They were, as Maya had confessed tearfully to her sister just last week, roommates with a shared history and a joint mortgage. The IVF failures had been a brutal blow, a shared wound that initially brought them closer in shared grief, but over time, it had morphed into a wall. Benjamin buried himself in work, building his architectural firm with a fierce intensity that left little room for anything else. Maya, after years of emotional and physical toll, retreated into her freelance graphic design, creating vibrant worlds on her screen while her own world felt increasingly monochrome. The shared dream of a family had faded, leaving behind a vacuum they didn't know how to fill together. Forgiveness for perceived slights, his absence during crucial injections, her sharp tongue born of exhaustion and disappointment, had been buried under layers of defensive silence. They weren't fighting. They were slowly forgetting how to connect. Maya pulled a sheet off a stack of boxes labeled Ben College Misc, in her own, much younger handwriting. A wry smile touched her lips. Misc covered a multitude of sins: concert tickets, faded band t-shirts, notebooks filled with the earnest, dramatic scribblings of a 22-year-old philosophy major. She lifted the lid, the cardboard brittle with age. Nestled amongst sociology, textbooks, and a surprisingly well-preserved hacky sack was a smaller, nondescript cardboard box. Inside that, wrapped in tissue paper yellowed at the edges, was a bundle of letters tied with a faded blue ribbon. Her breath hitched. Letters, Benjamin's handwriting, unmistakable even then, bold, slightly slanted, confident. Her fingers, dusty and slightly trembling, untied the ribbon. The top envelope was addressed to her at her old college dorm. She remembered this one, a silly, sweet note about missing her over spring break. The next few were similar: declarations of affection, plans for the weekend, complaints about a difficult professor. Then her fingers brushed against an envelope that felt different, thicker. The paper was heavier, cream-colored, slightly textured. Her name was written in that same bold script, but the ink seemed darker, the pressure deeper. There was no date, and it wasn't mailed. It had never been sent. Curiosity, sharp and sudden, pierced through the lethargy that had clung to her for months. She sank onto an old trunk, ignoring the cloud of dust it raised, the steady rain outside providing a strangely intimate soundtrack to this excavation of the past. Carefully, she slid a single sheet of paper from the envelope. The writing covered both sides, dense, the lines occasionally wavering as if written in haste or deep emotion. My dearest Maya, I'm writing this not because I intend to give it to you tonight, or maybe ever. How could I? The words feel too raw, too heavy, like stones I'd be throwing into the clear, beautiful pond of what we have. But I need to say them somewhere, somehow. I need to carve them out of myself before they fester. We talked about marriage again today. Really talked, not just the starry-eyed, someday whispers. You were sketching designs for your future studio, the sunlight catching the fierce concentration in your eyes, and you said, "When we're married, I want a huge window right there." And my heart soared. Maya, it truly did. The thought of building a life with you, brick by brick, dream by dream, is the brightest thing I know. But then the fear came. Cold and slick. It slithered in while you were describing bookshelves and laughed at something on your phone. It whispered things that make my hand shake even now as I write this. What if I fail you? Not in the big, dramatic ways, though those scare me too, but in the slow, insidious ways. What if the weight of forever becomes too much? What if the man you see now, full of ideas and passion, gets worn down by the sheer responsibility of it all? What if I become less attentive, less present, less me? The pressure of being someone's entire world, their safe harbor, it's terrifyingly immense. What if I get lost in providing, in building security, and forget to simply be with you? Forget to see the sunlight in your hair or the way you wrinkle your nose when you're thinking hard? What if husband becomes a role I play, a mask I wear, and the real Benjamin, the one who loves you with this terrifying, exhilarating intensity, gets buried underneath? I see my father, Maya. I see the quiet resignation in his eyes sometimes, the way he moves through the house like a ghost performing familiar tasks. He loves my mother, I know he does. But somewhere along the line, the spark, the themness of them, got smothered. By bills, by routine, by the sheer effort of keeping everything afloat. He became dad, provider, husband. But I rarely see the man who used to make mom laugh until she cried. What if that's my fate? What if I become a caretaker of our life instead of a participant in it? What if I stop seeing you, truly seeing you, and just see the responsibilities attached to you? And what if you get lost too? What if the brilliant, fiery artist I fell in love with gets dimmed by the compromises of sharing a life? What if your dreams shrink to fit the space left over after mine? The thought of your light diminishing, even a fraction, because of me. It feels like a crime. I want to be the wind beneath your wings, Maya, not the anchor. This is the fear that keeps me awake sometimes watching you sleep. This dread that marriage, this thing I want more than anything, could become the very thing that erodes the love it's built upon. That we could become two satellites orbiting the same life, but never truly connecting. That the US could fracture under the weight of expectation, of monotony, of unspoken disappointments. I'm writing this down to exercise it. To look this fear in the face and say, I choose you anyway. Despite the terrifying possibility of failing, of getting lost, of diminishing, I choose the terrifying, beautiful risk of building something real with you. Because the alternative, a life without your laugh, without your mind challenging mine, without your hand in mine, is unthinkable. It's a barren wasteland. So, I make a promise here, to myself and to the future us. I will fight to remember. I will fight to see you, truly see you every single day. I will fight against the tide of routine, against the lure of taking you for granted. I will guard against the part of me that might want to hide behind the mask of provider. I promise to stumble, Maya. I promise to fail sometimes. But I also promise to keep trying, to keep reaching for you, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. If you ever find this, if years from now we're in some quiet attic of our own, dusty and maybe a little weary, know this. The man writing this loves you with a ferocity that scares him. He believes in us with every fiber of his being, even as he trembles at the responsibility. He is choosing you consciously, knowing the risks. He begs the future Benjamin, don't forget. Don't get lost. Keep seeing her. Keep fighting for the love that feels like coming home. Yours, always, even when I'm scared, Benjamin. The rain continues its gentle rhythm, a counterpoint to the storm of emotion swirling within Maya. A soft sigh, almost imperceptible, blends with the sound of water. Maya sat frozen. The dusty attic, the boxes, the weight of the present. It all receded, swallowed by the sheer visceral power of the words on the page. It wasn't just a love letter, It was a prophecy, a chillingly accurate map of the very desolation they now inhabited. He had seen it. 25 years old, brimming with hope and terror, Benjamin had articulated the exact erosion that had silently crippled their marriage. The words blurred as tears welled, hot and insistent, spilling over and landing on the aged paper, creating dark blooms next to Benjamin's youthful ink. What if I become a caretaker of our life instead of a participant in it? He had become exactly that, a highly successful caretaker of a beautiful, empty life. What if I stop seeing you, truly seeing you, and just see the responsibilities attached to you? When was the last time he'd looked at her, really looked at her, not just registered her presence like a familiar piece of furniture? What if the use could fracture under the weight of expectation, of monotony, of unspoken disappointments? Fractured. That was the perfect word. They weren't broken, not entirely, but fractured. 1,000 hairline cracks weakening the structure, the raw honesty of his fear, his vulnerability. It undid her. She saw him now, not just the driven, sometimes distant man he'd become, but the young lover trembling at the magnitude of the commitment he was making, yet choosing it anyway. Choosing her. And the promises. I will fight to remember. Fight to see you. Fight against the tide of routine. Guard against the mask. Where had that fierce commitment gone? When had the fighting stopped? Had it been after the third failed IVF cycle? After his firm landed its biggest project, demanding every ounce of his energy? After she stopped expecting anything more than basic civility? Shame washed over her, cold and sharp. She had been so consumed by her own grief, her own sense of failure and abandonment, that she hadn't seen his struggle. She hadn't recognized the quiet disappearance of Benjamin behind the facade of Benjamin the provider, Benjamin the stoic. She'd contributed to the distance with her own retreat, her own unspoken accusations, her own protective shell. She hadn't fought either. She'd just let go. Forgiveness, she realized with a jolt, wasn't just something she needed to grant him for his absences, but something she needed to seek for her own complicity in their drift, and something she needed to offer for the young man who had been so terrified of failing her, and had in many ways done exactly that, just as she had failed him. The anger she'd nursed for months, a low simmer beneath the surface, didn't vanish, but it transformed. It was no longer the hot, resentful anger at his neglect. It was a profound, aching sadness for both of them, for the dreams they'd packed away, for the love they'd allowed to gather dust, just like the contents of this attic, for the promises made in youthful fervor that had been buried under the weight of unprocessed pain and the relentless march of time. She carefully folded the letter, its creases deepened by years and now by her tears, and placed it back in its envelope. Holding it felt like holding a live wire, humming with the potential to shock their stagnant world back into life. But it also felt fragile, precious. Proof that the man she fell in love with, the man capable of such deep feeling, such fierce commitment, such terrifying self-awareness, still existed. Somewhere beneath the layers of responsibility and quiet despair, that Benjamin was still there. He'd just gotten lost, just as he'd feared he would. She sat in the dusty silence. For a long time, the only sound the gentle, persistent rain. The decision formed slowly, solidifying with each calming breath she took, each drop of water hitting the roof. She wouldn't confront him immediately, not with anger, not with accusations. The letter wasn't a weapon, it was a bridge. A fragile, ancient bridge back to each other. The rain sound softened slightly, becoming a more distant murmur, allowing space for Maya's thoughts. Descending the attic stairs later felt like stepping between worlds. The cool, clean air of the hallway contrasted sharply with the attic's dusty stagnation, mirroring the shift within her. The house felt different, not just a collection of rooms, but a vessel holding the fragile possibility of renewal. She hid the letter carefully in her bedside drawer beneath a stack of sketchbooks. It needed the right moment. That evening, Benjamin came home late, as usual. He looked exhausted, the lines around his eyes deeper than Maya remembered noticing. He offered a tired smile. Hey, attic conqueror, how was the battle? It was illuminating, Maya said, her voice steadier than she felt. She met his eyes, really met them, for the first time in months. She looked past the fatigue, searching for the man who wrote the letter. She saw a flicker of surprise in his gaze at her directness. Yeah? Find any buried treasure? He hung up his coat, his movements automatic. You could say that, she murmured. Memories. Lots of memories. She walked towards the kitchen. I was thinking, it's raining. Perfect night for that lentil soup you like? I picked up fresh bread. Benjamin paused, his hand still on the coat hook. He turned, a genuine look, of surprise, mixed with a touch of wariness on his face. It had been months since she'd cooked his favorite meal spontaneously. Soup? Yeah. Yeah, that sounds great, Maya. Really great. There was a softness in his voice she hadn't heard in a long time. A crack in the wall. The meal was quiet, but the silence felt different. Less heavy, more aware. Maya watched him. The way he blew on a spoonful of soup, the absent way he pushed his hair back from his forehead, small, familiar gestures she realized she'd stopped truly seeing. She saw the fatigue, yes, but she also saw the lingering echo of the earnest, young man in the attic. She saw the responsibility weighing on him, not just as a burden he carried, but as a weight he'd shouldered partly for her, for the life they'd dreamed of, even if that dream had mutated. He caught her looking. What? He asked, a slight self-conscious smile touching his lips. Just remembering, she said softly. Do you ever think about that tiny apartment above the laundromat? How we could hear the dryers rumbling all night? Benjamin's smile widened, genuine this time, reaching his eyes. God, yes. And the smell of fabric softener permanently embedded in everything we owned. We were broke, but... He trailed off, the unspoken happy hanging in the air between them. He looked down at his soup, his expression thoughtful. We were good at figuring things out back then, weren't we? Even with the noise and the smell. We were, Maya agreed, her heart pounding. It was a small opening, a tiny acknowledgement of the US that existed before the fractures. We faced a lot of noisy, smelly challenges. She paused, then added, her voice barely above a whisper. We faced them together. Benjamin looked up, his gaze locking with hers. Something passed between them in that look. A recognition, a flicker of shared history, a question. He didn't reply, but he held her gaze for a long moment before nodding slowly, almost imperceptibly, and returning to his soup. The silence returned, but it was warmer now, charged with unspoken things. The rain outside provided a gentle soundtrack to this fragile, tentative reconnection. The rain picks up slightly, a steady downpour now, reflecting the building emotional current. The days that followed were a delicate dance. Maya carried the letter with her like a secret talisman, its words echoing in her mind. She consciously tried to see Benjamin. Not just his actions, but him. She noticed the way his brow furrowed when he read emails, the slight slump of his shoulders when he thought no one was looking, the genuine pleasure he took in his morning coffee. She started small, a cup of tea brought to his home office without him asking, leaving a silly doodle, a caricature of their grumpy cat, next to his keys, a text in the middle of the day. Remember the time we got caught in that downpour at the botanical gardens and had to take shelter in the greenhouse? Smelled like wet earth and orchids. No pressure, just presence, just memory. Benjamin, initially, wary, seemed to thaw slowly. He started leaving the office earlier, not drastically, but noticeably. He began asking about her projects with genuine interest, not just polite inquiry. One evening, he walked into the living room where she was sketching, hesitated, then sat down on the sofa nearby, picking up a book he hadn't touched in months. He didn't say anything. He just sat, read, existed in the same space with her intentionally. It felt monumental. The tension wasn't gone. It hummed beneath the surface, a reminder of the chasm that still existed. The unsaid words about the IVF, years, about the lonely nights, about the dreams deferred, still hung heavy. The letter burned in Maya's drawer, a silent catalyst. She knew she had to share it. But the timing had to be right. It needed vulnerability, not confrontation. Safety, not accusation. The moment arrived unexpectedly, catalyzed by the rain. A truly torrential downpour lashed against the windows one Saturday afternoon, trapping them inside. The power flickered, then died, plunging the house into a deep, velvety gloom punctuated only by the drumming rain and the occasional flash of lightning. They'd been working in separate rooms, Maya on her tablet, battery quickly dwindling, Benjamin reviewing blueprints by the fading gray light from the window. The sudden darkness brought them both into the living room, drawn by the instinctive need for proximity in the unexpected quiet. Maya lit candles, tall, vanilla-scented pillars, their flickering light casting dancing shadows on the walls. Benjamin rummaged in a drawer and found an old battery-powered lantern, its weak beam, adding to the intimate, cave-like atmosphere. "Looks like we're camping," he said, his voice sounding strangely loud in the quiet. He placed the lantern on the coffee table. "Minus the bugs and questionable sleeping bags," Maya replied, sinking onto the large, comfortable rug in front of the unlit fireplace. The rain was a constant roar now, a powerful natural force that made the house feel like a fragile haven. It stripped away distractions, leaving only the essential. The two of them, the candlelight, the sound of the storm. Benjamin hesitated, then sat down on the rug beside her, leaning back against the sofa. Not close enough to touch, but closer than they'd been in months for anything other than sleep. They sat in silence for a while, listening to the rain, watching the candle flames dance. The intimacy of the situation, the enforced closeness, the raw power of the storm outside. It created a space that felt suspended outside of time, outside of their accumulated grievances. The rain reaches its peak intensity, a loud, all-encompassing roar that fills the auditory space, then gradually begins to soften. "It's loud," Benjamin said finally, his voice low, almost absorbed by the sound of the rain. "It is," Maya agreed. She took a deep breath. The storm outside mirrored the one within her. It was time. The flickering light, the shared vulnerability, the reminder of nature's power. It felt like the space Benjamin had written the letter, in what raw, honest, stripped bare. "It makes me think about time, how much of it slips by." She paused, gathering courage. "Ben, when I was in the attic last week, I found something." He turned his head slightly towards her, his face half in shadow, half illuminated by the lantern's glow. "Oh?" "Yeah." Her voice was barely a whisper. "A letter. You wrote it, a long time ago, before everything." She reached into the pocket of her cardigan where she'd placed the envelope earlier, anticipating the storm, anticipating this moment. Her fingers trembled slightly as she pulled it out. The cream-colored paper seemed to glow in the candlelight. "You never sent it." Benjamin froze, his eyes locked onto the envelope in her hand, widening slightly. Recognition, then a slow dawning of disbelief, followed by something that looked remarkably like fear, flashed across his face. The fear of the young man who'd written it, suddenly present in the tired eyes of the man beside her. He didn't reach for it. He just stared, his breath catching audibly even over the rain. "It's..." Maya swallowed, her throat tight. "It's the most honest thing I've ever read, Ben, and the most terrifying. Because..." Her voice broke. "Because you saw it coming. You saw exactly where we could end up. And we ended up here." She held it out to him, not forcing it, just offering. "I think you should read it again. Now." The rain softened significantly, returning to a gentle, steady patter, holding space for the profound vulnerability unfolding. Benjamin stared at the envelope as if it were a ghost. His hand rose slowly, hesitantly, and took it. His fingers brushed against hers, a fleeting contact that sent a jolt through both of them. He didn't open it immediately. He just held it, looking down at his own youthful handwriting, his expression unreadable in the shifting light. The weight of years, of choices made and unmade, of love nurtured and neglected, seemed to settle heavily on his shoulders. Finally, with a sigh that seemed to come from the depths of his being, he carefully slid the single sheet of paper out. He unfolded it, the paper crackling softly in the quiet. He lifted it towards the combined light of the lantern and the nearest candle. Maya watched him, watched his eyes scan the first lines, then slow down. Watched the color drain from his face, leaving it pale and stark in the candlelight. Watched his jaw tighten, a muscle flickering in his cheek. She saw the exact moment he reached the part about his father, about his fear of becoming a ghost performing tasks. His breath hitched, a ragged sound. His hand, holding the paper, began to tremble visibly. He read on, slower and slower, each word seeming to land like a physical blow. When he reached the promises, "I will fight to remember, fight to see. You..." A low, wounded sound escaped him, almost a groan. He squeezed his eyes shut, pressing the heels of his hands against them, the letter crumpling slightly in his grasp. A soft, shaky breath is audible, blending with the rain. "Oh, God," he whispered, the words raw, choked. "Maya..." He couldn't seem to say more. He lowered his hands, opening his eyes. They were bright with unshed tears, reflecting the candlelight. He looked at her, really looked at her, with an intensity that hadn't been there in years. It was the look of a man waking from a long, deep sleep and finding the world irrevocably changed. He saw the lines around her eyes that hadn't been there at 25, the subtle streaks of silver in her dark hair, the quiet strength in her posture, and the profound sadness and hope warring in her own eyes. He saw her, not the wife, not the responsibility, but Maya, the woman he'd loved with terrifying intensity, the woman he'd promised not to lose sight of. "I forgot," he breathed, his voice thick with anguish and self-loathing. The letter trembled in his hand. "I forgot everything. The fear, the promise, you." He looked down at the damning, beautiful words. "I became exactly what I was afraid of, exactly what I promised I wouldn't be, a ghost, a caretaker." He looked back at her, his expression shattered. "I buried him. I buried the man who wrote this. I buried him under spreadsheets and deadlines and the silence." A tear finally escaped, tracing a slow path down his cheek. "I buried us." Single, soft sob blends with the rain, then silence except for the water. The raw confession hung in the candlelit air, mingling with the scent of vanilla wax and the sound of the rain. Maya felt her own tears fall freely now, hot and silent. It wasn't vindication she felt, hearing him voice their failure. It was a profound shared grief. Grief for the years lost, for the love neglected, for the young couple so full of hope and terror who hadn't realized how hard the fight would be. Forgiveness, both for him and for herself, began as a tiny, fragile bud, unfurling amidst the wreckage. "You didn't bury him alone, Ben," she said softly, her voice thick. "I helped. I stopped looking for him. I stopped expecting the fight. I built walls too." She reached out, tentatively, and placed her hand over his where it clutched the letter. His skin was cold. "We both got lost." He flinched at her touch, then turned his hand over, lacing his fingers tightly with hers. The connection was electric, grounding. He held on as if she were the only solid thing in a crumbling world. "This letter?" He looked down at their joined hands, then back at the crumpled page. "It's like looking into a mirror and seeing a stranger wearing my face, screaming warnings I didn't hear. The arrogance, to think I could avoid this, the naivety, to not understand how insidious it could be." He shook his head, a tear dropping onto the paper near his own signature. "And the love, God, Maya, the love in this. It burns. It burns because I feel it. It's still here. Buried, maybe. Smothered. But it's here. He squeezed her hand, his gaze desperate, pleading. Is it too late? Have we ruined it beyond repair? Maya looked into his eyes, seeing the young Benjamin from the letter superimposed over the weary, remorseful man before her. She saw the fear, yes, but also the fierce, enduring love he'd written about. She saw the potential for the fight he'd promised. The letter wasn't just a relic, it was a roadmap back. Back to the choice, back to the fight, back to each other, the say. Rain softens further, becoming a gentle, soothing whisper. It's not too late, Ben, she whispered, her own voice trembling with conviction. It's not ruined. Fractured, maybe. Badly. She managed a small, watery smile. But the foundation you wrote about, that terrifying, exhilarating love, I feel, it's still there, underneath all the dust. She squeezed his hand back. We found the map. Now we have to choose to follow it. Together. To fight. To remember. To see each other again. Even when it's hard. Especially then. Benjamin stared at her, the candlelight flickering in his wet eyes. He saw not just forgiveness in her gaze, but a challenge. A call back to the man who had promised to fight. A call to rebuild what they had allowed to decay. He lifted their joined hands, pressing her knuckles to his lips, a gesture so tender, so reminiscent of their early years, that it stole Maya's breath. You found me, he murmured against her skin, his voice rough with emotion. In this dusty letter, in this storm, you found me. The me who's terrified, yes, but the me who chooses you. Still. Always. He lowered their hands, looking directly into her eyes, his gaze fierce now, determined. I remember the promise. I remember the fear. And I choose the fight, Maya. I choose us. I choose to see you, every single day. I choose to fight the tide. I choose to come home. He took a deep, shuddering breath. Will you fight with me? Will you help me remember? A final, gentle sigh of rain, peaceful and full of promise. The storm outside was easing, the drumming rain softening to a gentle, persistent patter. Inside the candlelit haven, holding the fragile, powerful testament to their beginning, Maya looked at her husband, truly looked at him, seeing the past, the present pain, and the fragile, determined hope for the future mirrored in his eyes. The journey ahead wouldn't be easy. The fractures wouldn't heal overnight. There would be stumbles, moments of doubt, the ghosts of past hurts to confront. But they had found their way back to the starting point, back to the core truth buried beneath years of accumulated silence, a love worth fighting for. Yes, Ben, she whispered, her voice clear and strong in the quiet room, echoing the quiet strength of the rain outside. I choose the fight. I choose us. I choose to see you, every single day. Let's remember together. The gentle rain continues, a soft, soothing soundscape, fading slowly as the story concludes, leaving a sense of calm and hopeful renewal.